In this special upfront, is religion, is faith to blame for the violence and intolerance that we see around the world today? I'm Mehdi Hasan. The so-called new atheists see religion as irrational, unnecessary, evil. But is there hostility towards the faithful undermining their cause? That's our debate between two top atheists, physicist Lawrence Krauss and Harvard University's humanist chaplain Greg Epstein. But first, from the Christian Crusades to the rise of ISIL, religion seems to be involved in driving some of the world's worst conflicts. But the acclaimed author of the recent book, Fields of Blood, argues that religion isn't inherently violent and gets a bad rap. Politics, she argues, is to blame. Earlier, I spoke to this week's headliner, best-selling author, scholar, and former nun, Karen Armstrong. Karen Armstrong, thanks for joining me on Upfront. You often hear people say religion has been behind many, if not most, of the wars in history. It's behind much of the violence that we see in the world today, from ISIL in Syria or the Israel-Palestine conflict or the quote-unquote Hindu-Muslim standoff in Kashmir to Northern Ireland. What do you say to them?
We never go to war for a single reason. Military historians tell us that there are always multiple factors involved. Military, territorial, and above all economic, as well as political and social. And similarly terrorism. Religion is implicated in all these aspects, and all these conflicts and all these troubles. But if you look at Northern Ireland, it was a very minor component. This was a nationalist debate for two competing people in a single country. The IRA people very rarely went to church or went to mass. They call themselves nationalists.
But many would say today, when you have perhaps two of the most violent, brutal, messianic groups on earth, for example, Boko Haram in West Africa and ISIL in the Middle East, both claiming that they're fighting a holy war for God, for Islam, for jihad, should we just discount that? Should we just not believe what they're saying, not take them at their word?
Certainly they're making use of religious precepts, religious quotations. But the core leadership of IS, for example, are members of Saddam's disbanded army, who were and part of the response to the American and British invasion of Iraq. And many of the young people who are going out to join IS have very little knowledge of Islam. Two British jihadis who left a couple of years ago for Syria had ordered two books from Amazon. One was Islam for Dummies, and the other was the Quran for Dummies, which gives you an indication of their Islamic commitment. There are lots of other factors involved too.
You mentioned rightly that a lot of the ISIL leaders are ex-Saddamites, ex-Baathists, in there clearly for their own opportunistic, power-grabbing motives. But at the same time, while conceding that, surely you also have to concede that the leader of ISIL, the self-proclaimed caliph, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, does claim to be a caliph, a religious leader, God's vicegerent on earth. He does have a PhD in Islamic studies. So what would you say when people say, well, hold on, the group's leader is a religious fanatic?
Religion, like anything, like cooking, like sex, like art, you can go bad. You can have bad art and you can have bad religion. We just have a brilliant way of fouling things up. But I think if we just put it down, the dangerous thing is just to say, for example, that there is some inherent bias in Islam that pushes people towards that. No more is that true in Islam as it is of secularism, as it is of Christianity or Judaism. And of course, any ideology, be it religious or secular, has its fanatics. And so you can take any sort of ideal, which can be extremely beneficent in some respects, and Christianity, for example, has behaved atrociously in the past, and indeed so has secularism. And we often talk about the wonderful tolerance of secularism and its love of freedom, for example, but in fact it's been very violent in its short history too. That's not to deny that the ideals of secularism are good. They are excellent, but they have been interpreted in an extremely brutal way.
You've said in the past that we've recoiled quite rightly from our anti-Semitism, but we've still not recoiled from our Islamophobia. How do you turn that around? How do you get people to recoil from that? Is that even possible in a climate in which some Muslims are blowing stuff up?
This is really not helping matters. I got into this business about writing about Islam way back at the time of the Salman Rushdie crisis in 1990. And because I was appalled by the way in which the people who were supporting Salman Rushdie segued from an out-and-out denunciation of the Ayatollah's fatwa into an out-and-out denunciation of Islam as a bloodthirsty, evil religion. And I thought this is exactly the kind of language that was used in the 1930s and that made the concentration camps possible. And I am very worried about the loose way we talk about Islam in the West. I think, particularly here in Europe, we can't afford that kind of speech anymore with our record.
You started off as a nun. You mentioned you've been on a journey. You left the convent disillusioned, having rebelled. You've described your early writings as Dawkins-esque. What brought you back to religion? What made you reevaluate? And how would you describe your faith, your religious identity today?
I think I've just explained about the process of study for me. And I would still describe myself perhaps as convalescent in recovery after a bad religious experience. I don't belong to any particular religious affiliation or don't belong to a church or a mosque or a synagogue. I can't see any one of the great world's religions as superior to any of the others. Each has its particular genius, and each has its particular failings or Achilles' heel. But I do think that over time, religion, like art, like so many other ideologies, has enriched human life as well as damaged it.
Karen Armstrong, thanks for joining me on UpFront. It's the 21st century and apparently religion is on the way out. It's so old-fashioned and out of touch that it's in decline, it's dying, it's going the way of the dodo. Church attendances, we're told, are falling and the number of atheists is on the rise. But here's the truth. With the exception of Buddhists, all of the world's major religious groups are expected to grow in size in the coming decades. Take Christianity, which we've repeatedly heard is on the decline. And in places like Europe and even the United States, it undoubtedly is. But globally, by 2050, the number of Christians is projected to increase by more than a third. Just look at China, which in the 1980s was thought to have only a few million Christians, but now has around 80 million, which means more people go to church there every week than are members of the Chinese Communist Party. China is on course soon to become the world's biggest Christian country. Then there's sub-Saharan Africa, home to almost half of the world's 300 million odd Pentecostal Christians, the world's fastest growing religious movement. In fact, despite all the eulogies, Christianity will remain the world's largest religion come 2050. Again, it's not declining, it's just relocating. Now, don't forget Islam either. Technically, of course, the world's fastest growing religion as a whole. By 2050, there will be almost as many Muslims in the world as Christians. Hindu-majority India is expected to be home to the world's biggest Muslim population. Look, the fact is, as a report by Pew last year pointed out, by 2050, the total number of religiously unaffiliated people is expected to rise. But at the same time, religious groups are growing faster. As the Pew study noted, religiously unaffiliated people tend to be older and have fewer kids. Sorry, but basically the religious folks tend to be the ones who go forth and procreate. Oh, and as for the claim that the more advanced, more modern, more educated a society becomes, the more religion, supposedly a crutch for the poor and ignorant, falls away, well, tell that to the Chinese, the Indians, the Kenyans, the Nigerians, the Brazilians. All these countries are rapidly modernizing, and yet religion is on the rise in each of them. As the ancient Greek sage Homer once remarked, all men have need of the gods. Well, maybe not all men, but a fair few of them, and they're not going anywhere anytime soon. The number of atheists worldwide is on the rise, but so is a number of ways they define themselves. Some of them say religion is evil and should be actively resisted, eliminated even, while others are happy to coexist and even ally with faith communities. But are there more rhetorically belligerent types? Think Sam Harris, Richard Dawkins maybe, helping or hurting the atheist cause. And is there an unbridgeable gap between believers and disbelievers? To debate this, I'm joined by the best-selling author and physicist Lawrence Krauss, who has said religion is a negative force for humanity, and Greg Epstein, humanist chaplain at Harvard University, who said he's worried that some of his fellow atheists come across as extremely obnoxious. Gentlemen, thanks for joining me in the arena.
Thank you.
I know neither of you likes the label New Atheist, though it is a label that's stuck. It's been embraced in popular culture, in the discourse of the media. Whatever you want to call it, is the atheism that wants to challenge religion, get rid of religion, which sees religion as evil or harmful, Lawrence Krauss, has that helped or harmed your cause, the cause of disbelief? Has it been a positive force, a force for good in your view?
Look, I think it's important that people feel free to speak out about religion in a way like they would anything else. It obviously has effects both ways. I don't think it has hurt. Even in spite of the fact, it's raised the profile of the fact that everyone should be allowed to make fun of religion like they do sex and politics. It's the real problem, it seems to me, is that religion has had a chokehold on morality and the sense that you should never talk about it. And if we have that attitude, then we will never talk about it. And in a democratic society, everything should be subject to question. Now, there should be 1,000 points of light, and there are people who are extreme in one end, there are people who are more conciliatory.
Well, you've said that you see yourself more as an anti-theist, someone who's actively against God rather than an atheist.
I used to say that. My friend Christopher Hitchens had said that. I now have redefined myself as an apatheist.
Okay.
Namely, as far as science is concerned, God's irrelevant, and in fact, we should stop worrying and talking about it so much, because as far as the real world is concerned, science is the way to understand it.
Greg Epstein, does it help or does it hurt the attitude of being really, really challenging, aggressively critical?
It can hurt. It can hurt in certain cases because it pits us against people who are our allies, who are trying to help humanists and atheists like you and me to get good things done. People who are really, there are a lot of people in this world who see religion as their culture, their community, their family, their ancestors, and when we openly mock every aspect of it in a way that is very likely to be interpreted as disrespectful, then we are driving a wedge between ourselves and them. And you know, a lot of what you said just now is fairly reasonable, but the fact is you wrote a piece where you called on every scientist to be a militant atheist.
Well,
and, that may be something now that you want to walk back. I mean, I would want to walk that term back too. No, but you did call on all scientists to be militant atheists.
That was the title of that piece, The New Yorker. The editors choose the title. I wrote another piece in The New Yorker that said terrorism is really not as big a threat in the United States as people are making it out to be. And in fact, what I found is I was attacked by a lot of people on the atheist community, maybe the Sam Harris end of it, saying you're not being strong enough. That piece was sarcastic because I pointed out that I'm called militant atheist for asking questions, and if that's the case, all scientists should be called
Put the pieces aside. You also debated a lot of Muslims, Christians in public forums. What do you try and achieve with those debates? Are you trying to just convince them through sheer force of argument that they're wrong and you're right?
No, I'm never trying to convince people I'm debating with. I'm trying to talk to the people who are listening.
Okay, so
and the point is to, what really is important, and I think maybe we have the same goal in that sense, is to convince people that if they're questioning religion, they're not bad people. they're also not alone. In our society right now, atheism has a stigma of, in fact, there was a study done that showed that among the American public, atheists were the least trusted. Well, they were next to rapists among all people. And there's something wrong with that, because if you're afraid to openly question your beliefs for fear that you'll be attacked from outside, that's a problem.
But you're not trying to reach out or build relations, are you? Let's be honest.
And people have said, well, how can you, convince your followers? Me and Richard aren't trying to have followers. We're just trying to get people to think for themselves. That's all we want to do. I don't care in the end what people believe, as long as they think, openly question, and are willing to accept reality for what it is.
So let me ask Greg, you would presumably agree you want people to think for themselves. I would agree with that. I think everyone should agree with that. But do you think that's the right way? Do you get involved in debates? You're at Harvard University.
People call me up and ask me to debate the existence of God, and I tell them it's like asking an Orthodox rabbi to have a ham sandwich eating contest. I mean, I'm not going to do it, because people, when they think about religion, people think about a wide range of things. It's not just the beliefs that you and I would have political, social, and ethical problems with. It's a whole range of family and community traditions. And, I completely agree with you that we need to raise the standing of humanists, atheists, agnostics, and the non-religious in this country. But I think debating and competing with groups and trying to denigrate them and say they're actually worse than us is not the way to do it. I'd rather have us be represented by the idea of community, of being of service to others, of being compassionate to others.
I agree with you completely. It's very important. I think it's important on both sides in some sense, in a vibrant dialogue. But the idea is, look, religion has been with humanity since humanity has been civilized. It obviously fulfills some need, and as you point out, you can't just get rid of it whole hog without replacing it with something useful. So I think what you do is useful. But I think
are you trying to get rid of it, just to be clear?
I think ultimately we don't have to try. If you look at the first world, over time, the number of people who declare themselves as being religious is going down. Education inevitably yields lack of belief, and that's going to happen eventually. And so I don't think we have to do anything. I think it's happening on its own.
But doesn't that contradict then you going out and debating and writing and speaking? If it's happening on its own, why be so rhetorically belligerent?
We don't have to do anything to try and destroy it. What we have to do is try and convince people to think for themselves.
Well, let me ask you this, Greg. A lot of the quote-unquote new atheists recoil at the phrase moderate Muslim or moderate Christian, that the religious moderates, they say that they give cover to the fundamentalists and extremists within each community. You've said, quote, no, they should be allies. We need each other.
They absolutely are allies. I've known religious people, Christians, Muslims, Hindus, Buddhists, etc., who have fought for me, who fought for our community, who fought for our rights, who fought for our standing in the society, and they deserve praise for that. I was also really dismayed about a year ago to turn on the news and find that an anti-theist activist named Craig Allen Hicks had actually murdered in what is really obviously a hate crime, and some denied this, but it's really a hate crime, murdered 3 wonderful young Muslim Americans, honor students, people who were traveling
Chapel Hill, North Carolina.
Yes, exactly, in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, people who were traveling to the third world to help people, to provide free dental services. We need, in the atheist community and the humanist community, we need to condemn people who do wrong, whether they're atheists or religious, and we need to uphold people who do right, whether they're religious or atheists.
Look, the point is, all reasonable, rational people should be working together. And,
so you would work with religious moderates. You would ally with religious moderates.
The point is, I don't think we should label people. That's a real problem. I mean,
militant atheist is a label.
Look, and I was making fun of that label.
Hold on, you never used the phrase extremist or moderate ever.
Whether I've ever used it in writing, no, I don't label people. I don't think.
You don't refer to kind of Muslim extremism, Christian extremism?
I don't think I have.
Okay. So then does that mean they're all the same to you then? Do you distinguish between the kind of...
Individuals are individuals, and I think we have to treat them. And I think, for example, when you label obviously a lunatic who kills people an anti-theist, that suggests that that's
himself as that. And I woke up and realized that I had 27 mutual Facebook friends with this murderer.
Well, the point
because
is
he was somehow interpreting atheism as to mean that he should do things like this.
The people in San Bernardino who killed people are also labeled as Muslim extremists, but they're also deranged.
Right, and I think that's the main moderate thing. Muslim friends to speak out against that kind of thing.
Since you both raised the issue of Muslims, in recent years there's been a lot of concern about the alleged targeting of Muslims and of Islam Islam by the quote-unquote new atheists. Owen Jones, who's a British columnist, author, atheist, proud atheist, he wrote that atheism in public life has become dominated by a particular breed that dresses up bigotry as non-belief. As an atheist, he said, let's stop allowing the likes of Richard Dawkins to rant and rave about Muslims in our name. What do you say to atheists like Owen Jones, who are upset about the rhetoric?
I think you have to be honest about the fact that in the current world, Muslim extremism appears to be more violent and dangerous than other kinds of extremism.
I thought you said you don't use the phrase Muslim extremism.
You just used the word, okay, and you asked me to talk about that. The point is fundamentalism, and I use that word.
Yeah.
Let me say Islamic fundamentalists, just like there are Christian fundamentalists and there are Jewish fundamentalists. In my opinion, the real problem is, in some sense, it's no worse in a historical sense than any other kind of religious fundamentalism. Islam is younger.
But I think we all agree about problems of fundamentalism and extremism.
But
Richard Dawkins, who's a friend of yours, you mentioned him earlier, he says Islam is the greatest evil in the world today. Not Islamic fundamentalism. Islam is the greatest evil in the world today. Sam Harris says Islam is a cult of death, not Islamic extremism, Islam.
Well,
so when you
just
hear
the word Islamic extremism. Maybe you meant Islamic fundamentalism.
No. Sam Harris calls Islam a thoroughgoing cult of death. Dawkins calls Islam the greatest evil in the world today. So when you hear that, is that not demonizing or inciting?
It is. The problem, and I've experienced this because I spent a lot of time talking and to some extent debating Islamic, sometimes fundamentalists. The real problem, it seems to me, is that the Quran and the Bible is an incredibly violent, racist book that promotes a lot of evil. But the point is, most Christian fundamentalists don't buy it word for word, so they don't stone their children for disobeying, which the Bible says you should. It seems to me right now the problem is that, as far as the Quran is concerned, is that fundamentalists take those same admonitions of violence literally, and that is a fundamental difference.
You wouldn't blame the whole religion or all Muslims for that?
No,
in the way that some do.
But that's the reason it's more of a problem. You don't see so many Christian fundamentalists stoning other people's children. That's a problem right now.
I don't think you see that many Muslims stoning other people's children either,
No, but I mean, what I mean is taking admonitions of violence that are in the sacred books.
I take your point. Greg, do you buy the argument from Lawrence that it's just to do with the fact that the political debate, the reality, or is there, when Dawkins and others say, look, Islam is the particular issue, when you see the tweets and the comments, it does seem like a bit of an obsession.
A lot of the problems in the Muslim world are also partially the result of colonialism. If you look back a couple of generations ago, a lot of the leaders in the Arab and Muslim world were actually secular. But for political reasons, for reasons that have to do with oil and money and power, religious leaders were ushered in, and they are often extreme, and they are often taking advantage of their own people.
Right now, for better or worse, and maybe it's political reasons, you see more people claiming that they're committing acts of violence in the name of Islam than you do elsewhere, and that's a problem. That's a problem for Islam as much as it is for.
But I'm not sure. I'm not sure we're disputing that point. That clearly there's a group called Islamic State. My point to you is when Richard Dawkins says after the Paris attacks that women in headscarves should take them off in solidarity with the victims of the terrorist attack. Is that fair? That seems like you're holding all Muslim women around the world responsible for a terrorist.
Trying to provoke people to think about what's the point of headscarves.
Do you support such provocations?
I think provoking every now and then is fine. In fact, I would say, and this offends Muslims, that the main point is that Islam isn't any more stupid than Christianity or Judaism. They're all ridiculous.
But do you think you can build alliances with people when you tell them they're stupid, they're foolish, they're silly, they believe in a creep as a god, etc., etc., etc.? Is that possible?
No, you can't build alliances. But there's some groups you'll never build alliances with, and I think
1.2 billion people.
No, but I'm not talking about those groups. I'm talking about Islamic fundamentalists, who, in fact, I argued, are in some sense more of a danger. The biggest threat of Islamic fundamentalist terrorism is to Muslims.
I agree with you, which is why you probably shouldn't dismiss the entire faith and the entire community.
I don't think I have.
I think you've compared the God of Islam and Christianity to Saddam Hussein. That's not really a way of winning people over.
Well, I think all those gods are, but I think one has to, look, sometimes you have to get people to ask the question, what's the basis of their beliefs? Why are they doing it?
John Gray, the British philosopher, thinker, atheist, he says that a lot of people like you or Dawkins or others are campaigning atheists. They're missionaries. Would you accept that label, that you're a missionary for atheism?
I'm an evangelical for science. I'm pro understanding the real world and not letting myth and superstition build hatreds and separations between people. And that's my main interest. I'm much more interested in promoting science than I am destroying religion.
Greg, last word?
I'm interested in promoting humanism. And I think promoting humanism means building a community of non-religious people who are working towards a better world. And a better world involves peace. people will either decide that they want to be humanists like you or me, or they will decide to be religious. If they decide to be religious, we need to call them out on bad policy, but respect their dignity, the dignity of their choice, the dignity of their belief and their community. And we can't simply denigrate billions of people.
No, but we should respect people, but we don't have to respect all ideas. That's the
Gentlemen?
point.
Never said we did.
Yeah, no.
We'll have to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining me in the arena. Up Front, we'll be back next week.